What happens when one of the most respected actors in Hollywood walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a professional conversation and instead gets ambushed by a host on a power trip? In just 30 seconds, a single dismissive comment from Denise Welch would ignite a firestorm that turned a routine interview into one of the most explosive moments in British television history. Gary Oldman arrived at the Loose Women's studio that afternoon with nothing but good intentions. He was there to talk about his latest film, to connect with the audience, and to share some stories from his incredible career. The man had won an Oscar, worked with every major director in the business, and earned the respect of everyone in the industry. He came prepared to have a good time, but from the moment he sat down on that couch, something felt off. The panel that day consisted of Denise Welch, Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Kay Adams. The cameras were rolling, the audience was ready, and Gary settled into his seat with a warm smile. He greeted each of the hosts politely, shook hands, and waited for the conversation to begin. Denise Welch, sitting in the center position as the lead host, barely looked at him as she shuffled her notes. There was no warmth in her greeting, no genuine interest in having him there. It was the kind of cold reception that immediately puts a guest on edge. "So Gary," Denise began, glancing up briefly with what could only be described as a smirk. "You've been in Hollywood for quite a while now, haven't you? Must be nice getting all those big paychecks while the rest of us work for a living." The studio went quiet. The other panelists exchanged uncomfortable glances. Gary's smile faltered slightly, but he tried to laugh it off. "Well, I've been very fortunate," Gary replied diplomatically. "I love what I do, and I've been lucky enough to work with some incredible people over the years." "Lucky," Denise repeated, her tone dripping with condescension. "That's one word for it. Some of us would call it privileged. You do realize not everyone gets handed opportunities like you have, right?" Ruth Langsford jumped in quickly, trying to steer the conversation. "Gary, tell us about your new film. We're all very excited to hear about it." Gary turned to Ruth gratefully. "Thank you, Ruth. Yes, it's a thriller set in London, and we had an amazing cast. The director really pushed us to explore some dark territory, and I think people are going to find it quite intense." "Intense?" Denise interrupted, rolling her eyes. "Everything's so intense with you method actors, isn't it? Must be exhausting pretending to be someone else all the time. Do you even know who you really are anymore?" The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Janet Street Porter leaned forward, looking concerned. "Denise, I think that's a bit unfair," Janet said. "Gary's craft is well respected." "Oh, here we go," Denise shot back, waving her hand dismissively. "Everyone defending the Hollywood elite. How refreshing." Gary sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. He was trying to maintain his composure, but the disrespect was becoming impossible to ignore. "I'm not sure what you're getting at, Denise," Gary said calmly. "I came here today to have a conversation, not to be attacked." "Attacked?" Denise laughed sharply. "Oh, please. If you can't handle a few questions, maybe you should stick to reading scripts where someone else tells you what to say." Kay Adams touched Denise's arm gently. "Come on, Denise. Let's keep this friendly." But Denise pulled her arm away, her face flushing with what seemed like genuine anger. "No, Kay. I'm tired of celebrities coming on this show and expecting us to bow down to them. We have real conversations here. We talk about real issues. Not everyone wants to hear about your fancy film sets and your award shows." Gary took a deep breath. "I understand that you might have strong feelings about the entertainment industry, but I'm just a person doing a job that I love. I'm not asking anyone to bow down to me. I'm here because I was invited." "You were invited to promote your film," Denise snapped back, "to use our platform to make yourself more money. Let's not pretend this is some kind of generous gesture on your part." Ruth tried again to intervene. "Gary, I read that you did a lot of research for this role. Can you tell us about that process?" "I'd be happy to," Gary said, visibly grateful for the lifeline. "I spent several weeks observing detectives, learning about their techniques and their mindset. It was fascinating work, and it really helped me understand the character's motivation. Fascinating, Denise muttered under her breath, but loud enough for the microphones to pick up. Must be nice to have that kind of time to play pretend. That was the moment something shifted in Gary's demeanor. His patience, which had been admirable up to this point, was clearly wearing thin. "Excuse me," Gary said firmly, turning to look directly at Denise. "Is there a particular reason you're being so hostile? Have I done something to offend you personally?" Denise leaned back in her chair with an expression of false innocence. "Hostile? I'm just asking questions. Isn't that what we do on talk shows?" "Questions are fine," Gary replied evenly. "But what you're doing isn't asking questions. You're making judgments and attacking my profession. There's a difference." "Oh, now you're going to tell me how to do my job?" Denise's voice rose sharply. "That's rich, coming from someone who pretends for a living." Janet Street Porter put her cards down on the table in front of her. "Denise, stop. This is getting out of hand." "No, Janet. What's out of hand is having guests who think they're better than everyone else just because they've been in a few movies." Gary shook his head slowly. "I have never said or implied that I'm better than anyone. You're putting words in my mouth." "Am I?" Denise challenged. "Because from where I'm sitting, you Hollywood types are all the same. You come onto shows like ours, you give your rehearsed answers, you smile for the cameras, and then you go back to your mansions and forget all about the regular people who actually watch this program." The audience was dead silent now. Several people looked shocked. Others seemed embarrassed on behalf of the show. Kay Adams tried once more. "Let's take a breath here. Gary, we really do appreciate you coming on the show today." "Do you?" Gary asked, his voice calm but firm. "Because it certainly doesn't feel that way." Denise laughed harshly. "Oh, here comes the victim act. Poor Gary Oldman, being asked tough questions by a daytime television host. How will you ever recover?" "It's not about tough questions," Gary said, his voice rising slightly for the first time. "It's about basic respect. It's about treating another human being with common courtesy. Something you seem incapable of." "Don't you dare speak to me like that," Denise said, pointing her finger at him. "I've been doing this job for years, and I don't need some actor telling me how to conduct an interview." "This isn't an interview," Gary countered. "This is you trying to humiliate a guest for your own entertainment." Ruth Langsford looked genuinely distressed. "Gary, please. We didn't mean for this to happen. Denise, can we please just move on to the next segment?" "Move on?" Denise said incredulously. "Why should we move on? This is the most honest this show has been in weeks. At least we're having a real conversation now." "A real conversation?" Gary repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. "You call insulting someone's career and making assumptions about their character a real conversation?" "I call it honesty," Denise shot back. "Maybe you're just not used to being challenged." Gary stood up slowly, removing his microphone. "I'm used to being challenged. What I'm not used to is being disrespected for no reason. I came here in good faith, and you've done nothing but attack me from the moment I sat down." "Oh, sit down," Denise said dismissively. "You're being dramatic." "Dramatic?" Gary's voice was incredulous. "You've spent the last 15 minutes insulting my profession, questioning my integrity, and making baseless accusations about who I am as a person, and I'm being dramatic for calling it out?" Janet Street Porter stood up as well. "Gary, please, don't leave. This doesn't represent how we normally do things here." Gary turned to Janet with a sad smile. "I appreciate that, Janet. I really do. But I'm not going to sit here and be someone's verbal punching bag." "Nobody's asking you to be a punching bag," Denise interjected. "I'm just asking you to be real for once in your life." "Be real?" Gary turned back to face her, his patience finally exhausted. "You want me to be real? Fine. You're a bully. You're using your position as a host to attack someone who came here as your guest. You're hiding behind the guise of tough journalism when really you're just being cruel for the sake of being cruel. And the worst part is, you seem to think you're justified in doing it. The color drained from Denise's face, but she recovered quickly. How dare you call me a bully? You don't know anything about me. I know what I've experienced in the last 20 minutes, Gary said, and I know that I don't need to subject myself to this kind of treatment. I've worked with some of the most demanding directors in the world. I've tackled incredibly challenging roles, and I've always conducted myself professionally. I don't need to prove anything to you. Kay Adams was nearly in tears. Gary, please, can we start over? Can we have a proper conversation about your film? Gary looked at Kay with genuine sympathy. I appreciate the offer, Kay. But no, I think the damage is done here. There's no damage, Denise insisted, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. You're overreacting. I'm overreacting, Gary repeated flatly. That's your response, not an apology, not an acknowledgement that maybe you crossed a line, just more dismissiveness. Ruth Langsford tried one last time. Gary, we have millions of viewers watching. Please don't let it end like this. Gary turned to Ruth, and his voice softened. Ruth, with all due respect to you and to the viewers, I can't stay here and pretend everything is fine. Your colleague has made it clear that she has no interest in having a respectful conversation. She's more interested in scoring points and getting a reaction. Well, she's got her reaction, but I won't be part of whatever game she's playing. It's not a game, Denise protested, but her voice lacked conviction now. Isn't it? Gary asked. Because from where I'm standing, it certainly feels like you were trying to provoke me from the very beginning. And I have to ask myself why. What did you hope to gain from this? Did you think I would fight back and give you a dramatic moment for the cameras? Did you think I would just sit here and take it? What was the end game here, Denise? Denise opened her mouth to respond, but seemed to struggle for words. Janet Street Porter stepped closer to Gary. Gary, I'm truly sorry this happened. This isn't who we are. I believe you, Janet, Gary said sincerely. And I'm sorry that you all got caught in the middle of this. But I have to draw a line somewhere. I have to stand up for myself. Standing up for yourself by running away? Denise found her voice again, her tone mocking. How brave. Gary stopped and turned back one more time. Running away would have been staying silent while you continued to disrespect me. Running away would have been letting you treat me like dirt, just because I didn't want to cause a scene. What I'm doing is choosing to remove myself from a toxic situation. There's a difference. Toxic, Denise scoffed. Everything's toxic these days if people don't get their way. No, Gary said firmly. Toxic is what happens when someone abuses their power and then acts like the victim when they're called out on it. Toxic is what happens when someone refuses to take responsibility for their actions. Toxic is what this conversation has become. The audience began to murmur. Some people were nodding in agreement. Others looked uncomfortable. But everyone was riveted. Kay Adams made one final plea. Gary, please, 5 more minutes. Let us show you that we can do better. Gary looked at her for a long moment, and for a second it seemed like he might reconsider. But then he shook his head. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Kay. But 5 more minutes won't change what's already happened. It won't erase the things that have been said. And honestly, I don't think I could sit back down on that couch and pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't. So that's it? Denise challenged. You're just going to walk out? Yes, Gary said simply. I am. Typical, Denise muttered. Can't handle the heat. Gary stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back one last time. It's not about handling the heat, Denise. It's about refusing to be treated with disrespect. There's a line between challenging questions and personal attacks, and you crossed it repeatedly. I came here to talk about my work, to share some stories, to connect with your audience, Instead, I got ambushed by someone who seems to have a personal vendetta against an entire industry. I don't have a vendetta, Denise protested weakly. Then what do you call this? Gary gestured at the stage. Because from my perspective, you spent this entire interview trying to tear me down. You questioned my integrity, mocked my profession, and made assumptions about my character without knowing anything about me. And when I called you out on it, you doubled down instead of showing even a shred of self-awareness. Ruth Langsford had tears in her eyes now. Gary, I'm so sorry. This should never have happened. I know you are, Ruth, Gary said gently, and I'm sorry that you're in this position. But I can't stay. I just can't. With that, Gary Oldman walked off the Loose Women stage, his microphone already removed and handed to a shocked producer. The cameras captured every step he took toward the exit, his posture straight, his head held high. The remaining panel members sat in stunned silence. Janet Street Porter looked furious. Kay Adams was wiping her eyes. Ruth Langsford seemed at a loss for words, and Denise Welch sat in the center seat, her face a mixture of defiance and something that might have been uncertainty. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or sit in silence. Some people started clapping slowly, showing their support for Gary's decision to leave. Others just stared at the stage in disbelief. Janet finally broke the silence. Well, that was absolutely appalling. Denise, I don't know what you were thinking. I was doing my job, Denise insisted, but her voice was defensive now. Your job is to interview guests, not interrogate them like they've committed a crime, Janet replied sharply. I was asking real questions, Denise maintained. No, Ruth said quietly, finding her voice. You were being cruel. There's a difference between asking tough questions and being deliberately hurtful. Oh, come on, Denise said, looking around at her fellow panelists. You're all acting like I committed some terrible sin. I was just being honest. Honest? Kay said, her voice shaking slightly. You were being mean. And you did it to one of the most respected actors in the world who came here as our guest. He's not that special, Denise muttered. That's not the point, Janet said firmly. The point is that he was a guest on our show, and we're supposed to make guests feel welcome, not attack them. I didn't attack him, Denise protested. You absolutely did, Ruth said. You questioned his work ethic, his character, his authenticity. You made him feel unwelcome from the moment he sat down. And when he tried to respond with grace and diplomacy, you pushed harder. Maybe he needed to be pushed, Denise said stubbornly. Why? Kay asked. Why did Gary Oldman need to be pushed? What did he do to deserve that treatment? Denise didn't have an answer. The producer in the control room was frantically signaling to go to commercial, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing every uncomfortable second. I think we need to address what just happened, Janet said, looking directly at the camera. To anyone watching at home, I want to apologize. That was not how we conduct interviews on this show. Gary Oldman came here as our guest, and he deserved better than what he received today. I'm not apologizing, Denise said firmly. I stand by everything I said. Of course you do, Ruth said sadly, because that would require you to admit you were wrong. I wasn't wrong, Denise insisted. I was real. There's a difference between being real and being rude, Kay said quietly. And today, you crossed that line. The atmosphere on the set was thick with tension. The audience sat in uncomfortable silence, unsure of what to do or say. Behind the cameras, crew members exchanged shocked glances. He walked out because he couldn't handle the truth, Denise said, trying to regain control of the narrative. He walked out because you gave him no choice, Janet corrected her. You backed him into a corner with your hostility, and when he stood up for himself, you mocked him for it. That's not journalism, Denise. That's bullying. I am not a bully, Denise said, her voice rising. Then what do you call what just happened? Ruth asked. Because I've been doing this show for years, and I've never seen a guest treated that way. He's an actor, Denise said dismissively. He can handle it. He's a human being, Kay corrected, and human beings deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of their profession. The producer finally managed to cut to commercial, but the damage was done. The conversation that had just played out on live television would be replayed and discussed for days to come. In the green room, Gary Oldman gathered his belongings while his publicist made frantic phone calls. A production assistant approached him hesitantly. "Mr. Oldman, I'm so sorry about what happened out there. That's not how we normally do things." Gary gave her a kind smile. "I appreciate that. Thank you. Is there anything we can do?" she asked. "No," Gary said gently. "I think the best thing I can do is leave quietly and let everyone process what happened." "For what it's worth," the production assistant said, "I think you handled that with incredible grace. A lot of people would have lost their temper much sooner." "Losing my temper wouldn't have helped anyone," Gary replied, "including me." As he headed toward the exit, staff members stopped him to apologize, to shake his hand, to tell him they were sorry for what had happened. Each time, Gary responded with kindness and understanding, making it clear that he held no ill will toward anyone except the person who had instigated the entire confrontation. Back on the set, as the commercial break ended, the remaining panel members tried to continue with the show, but the energy had completely changed. The easy banter and friendly conversation that usually characterized Loose Women was gone, replaced by an awkward tension that hung over everything. "Let's try to get through the rest of the show," Ruth said, forcing a smile for the camera, but it was clear that nobody's heart was in it anymore. The episode had been derailed by what happened with Gary, and there was no recovering from it. Denise sat quietly for the rest of the show, her earlier bravado noticeably absent. Whether she was processing what had happened or simply avoiding further conflict with her co-hosts remained unclear. What was clear was that something had fundamentally shifted. A guest had walked off their set, not because of a technical issue or a scheduling conflict, but because of how he had been treated. And everyone in that studio knew it. The cameras captured it all. Every word, every expression, every moment of tension. It would be dissected and analyzed by viewers, critics, and fellow professionals. People would debate who was right and who was wrong. They would discuss whether Gary should have stayed or whether he was justified in leaving. But for Gary Oldman, walking out of that studio, the decision was simple. He had drawn a line. He had stood up for himself. He had refused to be treated with disrespect, regardless of the consequences. And as he stepped out into the afternoon sunlight, away from the cameras and the chaos, he felt something that had been absent throughout that entire interview. Peace. The interview that was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance had turned into something else entirely. A moment where a respected professional said, "Enough is enough." A moment where someone refused to play along with behavior they found unacceptable. A moment that would be remembered and discussed long after the controversy faded. Gary had come to that studio to talk about his craft, his passion, and his work. Instead, he had been forced into a confrontation he never wanted or expected. But he had handled it with dignity, with restraint, and ultimately with the self-respect to walk away when the situation became untenable. Inside the studio, the show continued, but everyone knew that the real story had already happened. The moment when a guest stood up and said no more. The moment when someone decided that maintaining their dignity was more important than staying for the cameras. And in that moment, Gary Oldman had shown exactly the kind of strength and character that had made him one of the most respected actors of his generation. Not through dramatic gestures or angry outbursts, but through quiet conviction and the courage to walk away from a situation that had become toxic. The conversation on that stage had been difficult to watch. The tension had been palpable. The disrespect had been obvious. But Gary's response had been measured and appropriate. He had tried to engage in good faith. He had attempted to redirect the conversation multiple times. He had given chances for things to improve. Only when it became clear that the hostility would continue did he make the decision to leave. And he did so with his head held high, his dignity intact, and his self-respect firmly in place. For the viewers watching at home, it was a masterclass in how to handle difficult situations with grace, how to stand up for yourself without losing your composure, how to recognize when a situation has become unproductive and have the courage to remove yourself from it. Gary Oldman didn't come to Loose Women looking for confrontation. He came ready to have a pleasant conversation about his work. But when he was met with hostility instead of hospitality, he didn't shrink or lash out. He responded with dignity and ultimately with the self-assurance to walk away. The stage was left with 4 panelists instead of 5 elements. The interview that should have happened never did. And the audience was left with a powerful example of what it looks like when someone draws a line and refuses to cross it, no matter what the cameras are recording or who is watching. What should have been a simple promotional appearance had transformed into something far more significant. It became a moment that showcased the importance of boundaries, of self-respect, and of refusing to participate in situations designed to demean or diminish. The questions that Denise had asked were not designed to illuminate or inform. They were designed to provoke and belittle. And when Gary recognized that truth, he made the only choice that made sense. He chose himself. He chose his dignity. He chose to walk away from a situation that had no possibility of redemption. Throughout the entire confrontation, Gary had maintained his composure in ways that most people would find difficult. He had been insulted, mocked, and dismissed. His career had been trivialized, his character questioned, and his presence treated as an inconvenience rather than a gift. Yet he had responded with patience and grace far beyond what the situation warranted. He had given Denise multiple opportunities to course correct, multiple chances to step back from the aggressive stance she had taken, multiple openings to have a genuine conversation instead of a confrontation. Each time, she had chosen to escalate rather than de-escalate. Each time, she had doubled down on her hostility rather than showing any willingness to engage respectfully. The other panelists had tried their best to salvage the situation. Ruth had attempted to redirect the conversation toward the film. Janet had challenged Denise's approach directly. Kay had pleaded for civility and a fresh start. But none of their interventions had made a difference because Denise had been committed to her approach from the beginning. It raised questions about what she had hoped to achieve. Was this planned? Had she decided before Gary even arrived that she was going to take this confrontational approach? Or had something about his presence triggered a reaction she couldn't control? Whatever the answer, the result was the same. A guest had been driven off the stage by the very person who was supposed to make him feel welcome. For Gary, the decision to leave was not made lightly. He understood the implications. He knew it would create headlines. He knew people would talk about it. He knew there would be those who criticized him for not staying and fighting back more aggressively. But he also knew that staying would have required him to compromise his values and accept treatment that no one should have to accept. There is power in walking away. There is strength in knowing when a situation has become toxic and removing yourself from it. Gary demonstrated that power and that strength in front of millions of viewers. He showed that you don't have to raise your voice to stand up for yourself. You don't have to match hostility with hostility. Sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make is simply refusing to participate. The conversation that followed his exit revealed just how divided the panel was about what had happened. Janet and Ruth clearly understood that a line had been crossed. They recognized the hostility and felt genuinely sorry about what had transpired. Kay seemed torn between wanting to be supportive of her colleague and knowing that something had gone terribly wrong. But Denise remained defiant. Even after Gary had left, Even after her fellow panelists had challenged her behavior, she maintained that she had done nothing wrong. She framed her actions as honesty and authenticity when they were really just cruelty dressed up in the language of tough journalism. That defiance was perhaps the most telling part of the entire situation. It revealed that this was not a case of someone who had lost their temper or made a mistake in the heat of the moment. This was someone who had consciously chosen an approach and stood by it even when confronted with the consequences. The audience's reaction throughout the interview had been revealing as well. The initial discomfort when Denise's first barbed comments landed, the growing tension as the hostility escalated, the shocked silence when Gary stood up to leave, and finally, the scattered applause as he walked away, showing that many in the audience supported his decision. Those audience members understood what they had witnessed. They had seen someone try repeatedly to have a civil conversation in the face of unrelenting hostility. They had seen someone maintain their dignity when being attacked. And they had seen someone make the difficult choice to prioritize their self-respect over the convenience of staying put. For aspiring performers, for anyone in the public eye, for anyone who has ever been in a situation where they felt disrespected and wasn't sure how to respond, Gary's handling of that interview provided a blueprint. Be patient. Be polite. Give multiple chances for improvement. But ultimately, know your worth and be willing to walk away when the situation demands it. The interview also highlighted a broader issue about how guests are sometimes treated on talk shows. The assumption that because someone has agreed to appear, they have also agreed to be a target. The belief that celebrities are fair game for any kind of treatment because of their status or success. The idea that being famous somehow means surrendering your right to basic respect and courtesy. Gary challenged all of those assumptions simply by refusing to accept them. He reminded everyone watching that fame and success do not negate humanity, that having a public profile does not mean surrendering your dignity, that agreeing to do an interview does not mean agreeing to be mistreated. His walk-off was not a tantrum or a dramatic gesture designed for effect. It was a calm, measured response to an untenable situation. He didn't storm off in anger. He didn't shout or threaten. He simply stated his position clearly, explained his reasoning, and removed himself from an environment that had become hostile. The professionalism he displayed throughout was remarkable. Even as he was being attacked, he never once responded with personal insults toward Denise. He criticized her behavior and her approach, but he never made it personal in the way she had. He maintained the high ground throughout, which made his eventual departure all the more powerful. That kind of restraint requires tremendous self-control. It would have been easy to match her energy, to fire back with equal hostility, to turn the interview into a shouting match. But Gary understood that doing so would have accomplished nothing. It would have given Denise exactly what she seemed to want, a dramatic confrontation that could be replayed endlessly. Instead, he gave the audience something more valuable, a demonstration of how to handle conflict with maturity and grace, a lesson in maintaining composure under pressure, an example of standing firm without escalating. These are not easy things to do, especially when cameras are rolling and millions are watching. The fact that he did it so effectively speaks to both his character and his experience. He has been in the public eye for decades. He has dealt with difficult personalities and challenging situations throughout his career. He knows that sometimes the best response is no response. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply remove yourself from the equation. For Denise and the show, the fallout from the interview would be significant. Questions would be asked about judgment and professionalism. Conversations would be had about how guests should be treated and what constitutes acceptable behavior for a host. The incident would become a case study in what not to do when interviewing someone. But for Gary, the moment he stepped out of that studio, it was over. He had made his point. He had stood up for himself. He had drawn his line in the sand. Now he could move forward, knowing that he had handled a difficult situation in a way he could be proud of. The interview that never really happened, because of how quickly it devolved into confrontation, would ironically become one of the most talked about interviews in the show's history. Not because of what was said about the film or Gary's career, but because of what it revealed about respect, boundaries, and the courage to walk away. Every person who watched that interview learned something, whether they realized it or not. They learned that you can stand up for yourself without being aggressive, that you can draw boundaries without being unreasonable, that you can walk away from toxicity without being weak, and perhaps, most importantly, that no amount of fame or success should require someone to accept disrespectful treatment. Gary Oldman came to that studio as a guest. He left as something more, a reminder that dignity and self-respect are not negotiable, regardless of the circumstances or the audience.